and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud. This is Little Blue Book. It just happens to be Little Blue Book number 727, and it is titled The Psychology of the Affections, written by Vance Randolph, copyright 1924. Alrighty, so this is part 4.
Hello, welcome to my podcast.
And we left off mid page 44, so here we go. In regard to mixed feelings, he says, opposite feeling elements may fuse, sometimes tending to mutual neutralization, sometimes without any neutralization, producing in the latter case a mixed feeling. Wohlgemuth found no evidence for effective imagery. In a brief chapter entitled Significantly Enough, The Affective Elements of Consciousness, Engel says, conditions and feelings are not two distinct kinds of entire mental states. They simply designate certain distinguishing features of such total psychical conditions. An act of memory or of reasoning is cognitive, insofar as it involves knowledge process. It is feeling, insofar as it is my knowledge experience in a certain way with a certain tone. A rough distinction is sometimes made between cognition and feeling by saying that cognition furnishes us the nouns and adjectives, the whats of our states of consciousness, while feeling affords the adverbial how. What are you conscious of? An object, a picture? How does it affect you? Agreeably? The first question and answer bring out the cognitive factors. The second emphasize the feelings. Another line of demarcation which is sometimes proposed is based on the assertion that cognition informs us of objects and relations external to our minds, whereas feeling informs us of our own internal mental condition. The general character of the distinction will become more evident as we examine more carefully certain specific types of conscious experience. Engel is not impressed by the view that affective elements are always present. Apparently, sensory forms of consciousness may occur without any, or at all events without any unmistakable accompanying, boy, that's a rough one, process of agreeableness and disagreeableness. On the other hand, it does not seem possible to point out any case in which the consciousness of pleasantness and unpleasantness occurs independently of sensation or ideas. The agreeable-disagreeable element or phase of our states of consciousness is often spoken of as affection. The total complex state in which it occurs, including sensory and ideational elements, being then called feeling. After a brief outline of the theories of Wundt and Royce, which I have treated elsewhere in this book, Engel states his opinion that the experiences of strain and relaxation and those of excitement and its opposite may be reduced to kinesthetic and organic sensations, and that there are only two modes of affection, viz. Pleasantness and unpleasantness. In distinguishing between the feelings of unpleasantness and the sensation of pain, he points out that pain, like any other sensation, is sometimes disagreeable, sometimes neutral, and sometimes even pleasant. It may possibly seem to strain veracity somewhat to speak of this sensation as ever being neutral, much less agreeable, and yet slight sensations of this character are at least interesting, and many persons secure a certain thrill of pleasurable gratification in gently touching a wound, in approaching with the tongue a sore or loose tooth, etc. Since affection is so intimately connected with sensory activities, says Engel, it is also closely bound up with the three fundamentally significant features of sensation, viz., intensity, duration, and extensity. The case of duration is relatively simple and obvious. Sensory stimuli of extremely brief duration may, if we are attempting to attend to them, be somewhat unpleasant. Stimuli which are agreeable at first, such as certain tones, often become positively disagreeable if long continued, and always, under such conditions, become at least tedious. It must be remembered that in some instances, for example, cases of olfactory and thermal stimulation, the sense organ becomes either exhausted or adapted, as the case may be, and that for this reason the stimuli practically cease to be felt, cease properly to be stimuli. Disagreeable stimuli, when long contained, become increasingly unpleasant, until exhaustion sets in to relieve, often by unconsciousness, the strain upon the organism. There is, therefore, for any particular pleasure-giving stimulus a definite duration at which its possible agreeableness is at a maximum. All sensory experiences, if continued long enough or repeated frequently enough, tend accordingly to lose their affective characteristics and become relatively neutral. As familiar instances of this, one may cite the gradual subsidence of our interest and pleasure in the beauties of nature when year after year we live in their presence, or the gradual disappearance of our annoyance and discomfort at the noise of a great city after a few days of exposure to it. The relation of affection to the intensity of the accompanying sensation is complicated by the fact that the intensity does not always and altogether depend upon the nature of the stimulus, but also upon the condition of the organism, and the temporary relations between the two. When one has a headache, the sound, which otherwise might hardly be noticed, seems extremely loud. Commonly, however, sensations of very weak intensity are either indifferent or slightly exasperating and unpleasant, and those of high intensity are usually unpleasant, owing to the obvious connection of the sensory attributes of duration and intensity. We shall expect that affection will show variations in keeping with the relations between these two. A very brief stimulus of moderate intensity may affect the nervous system in a very slight degree. A moderate stimulus, on the other hand, if long continued, may result in a very intense neutral activity, and so be accompanied finally by unpleasant affective tone, rather than by agreeableness, which generally belongs to moderate stimulation. Engel does not devote much attention to the third characteristic of sensation, that of extensity, as related to the affective phenomena, beyond saying that its effect is important in the perception of form. Otherwise, the facts are accounted for under the head of intensity. A color which seems to us beautiful, when a sufficient amount of it is presented to us, may become indifferent when its extent is very much diminished. This consists practically, however, in substituting for a moderate intensity of visual stimulation one of very restricted intensity. In summarizing his views, Engel says that affection agrees with sensation in processing degrees of intensity and duration, although it never displays extensity. Nor do we seem to localize it as we do sensations. It apparently possesses only two fundamental qualities, agreeableness and disagreeableness, which shade through an imaginary 0 point into one another. On both sides of this 0 point there are ranges of conscious experience whose affective character we cannot introspectively verify with confidence, and we may call this zone the region of neutral affective tone. Although Engel stands committed to the view that affection is a distinct element of consciousness, he is not, like the structuralists at Cornell, altogether unfavorable to the sensory theories. In a footnote in his textbook, he remarks, the doctrine is sometimes maintained that our affective process are in reality organic sensations, chiefly connected with the vital organs of digestion, respiration, and circulation. Our inability to localize them is referred to their necessarily diffused character. They are supposed to be called out either directly by appropriate external stimuli or indirectly by the reflex motor consequences of such stimuli. The latter form would probably be the usual occurrence. Calkins accepts the traditional two-dimensional view of the affective process. In her discussion of the elements, she says that a structural analysis finds in emotion at least the following. 1. Affective elements of pleasantness and unpleasantness, and 2. Organic sensational elements. The affections are distinguished from sensational elements in that they have no definite physical stimulus, no distinct form of physical energy which corresponds with them, in the way in which vibrations of ether normally condition sensations of color, and atmospheric waves condition sensations of sound. Is that condition? Yeah, condition. Okay. This independence of physical stimulation is admitted by everybody, so far as the mode of physical stimulus is concerned. Ether or atmospheric vibrations and chemical or electrical liquid or gaseous stimuli may bring about now a pleasant, now an unpleasant, now a perfectly indifferent experience. It is true that certain sensational qualities, pain, and probably also certain smells and tastes, are always unpleasant, and there may be certain sensational qualities which are always pleasant. But nonetheless, every class of sensational qualities, except that of pain, includes both agreeable and disagreeable experiences, and many sensational qualities are sometimes pleasant, at other times unpleasant, and again indifferent. Remarking that one may profitably guess at the psychological basis for the affections, Miss Calkins develops her theory as follows. Pleasantness and unpleasantness are occasioned by the excitation of fresh or of fatigued cells in the frontal lobes of the brain, and the frontal lobe is excited by way of neurons from the Rolandic area of the brain. When the neurons of the frontal lobes, because of their well-nourished and unfatigued condition, react more than adequately to the excitation which is conveyed to them from the Rolandic area, an experience of pleasantness occurs. When, on the other hand, the cells of the frontal lobe become of their ill-nourished and exhausted condition react inadequately to the excitation from the Rolandic area, then the affection is of unpleasantness. When, finally, the activity of the frontal lobe cells corresponds exactly to that of the excitation, the given experience is neither pleasant nor unpleasant, but indifferent. Calkins discusses the experimental studies of the bodily conditions of affection in a few words, but says that the following distinctions may be accepted as more or less probable. 1. Pleasantness is characterized by a slow and strong pulse, by dilating arteries, and by bodily warmth. Unpleasantness is characterized by a fast, weak pulse, and by bodily chill. This is the result best established by experiment and by introspection. 2. Pleasantness is perhaps characterized by relatively quick and weak breathing. Unpleasantness by slow and deep breathing. This conclusion is not so well substantiated. Yerkes regards feelings as elements of consciousness and reviews the theories of Wundt and Royce in his elementary textbook. He seems inclined to the view that there are only two affective qualities, pleasantness and unpleasantness. He does not accept Titchener's clearness arguments as a differentiation between affection and sensation. To the writer, it seems To the reader, it seems hard to turn the page. Let's find out what the writer seems. To the writer, it seems as certain that affections possess clearness as that sensations possess this same property. Either an intense sensation or an intense affection may be clear or unclear. The affection, however, is never as clear as a sensation at its best, and it certainly tends to become unclear as it is observed. A feeling, according to Yerkes, cannot be described with reference alone to its quality, intensity, clearness, and duration. Its individual properties must also be taken into consideration. The sense feeling, which is almost inextricably associated with the taste of bitter aloes, differs in a number of respects from the feeling of depression, which follows stage fright. To name a few of these special or particular properties will render clearer the meaning of this statement. The sense feeling in question is more definitely limited to its bodily reference. It interferes more acutely with attention to other features of consciousness. It tends to stir one up instead of to depress. It possesses usually a high degree of clearness. It has its own particular affinities with other elements of consciousness. In all these respects, the two feelings are markedly different. Warren divides all experience into two classes: sensations, images, perceptions, memories, thoughts, etc., are called cognitions, or intellectual experiences. They have to do chiefly with objects and conditions outside of our body. Feelings, emotions, and sentiments are experiences which are made up chiefly of systemic sensations, or in which systemic sensations are especially prominent. These experiences are concerned first and foremost with the conditions of our bodily organism, and are called affective experiences. Pillsbury uses the term affection to refer to the actual qualities of pleasantness and unpleasantness, and the word feeling to designate a complex of affection and sensation. Affection differs from sensation in that there are no special sense organs. There are special organs for pain, but unpleasantness is quite another matter. Still less it is possible to find a specific sense organ for pleasantness. It has been suggested that tickle may be the pleasant quality, and that there is a specific sense organ of tickle. The latter statement, however, is very questionable. Tickle spots have now and again been reported, but the report has never been generally accepted. Granted the existence of the tickle spots, the same objections hold to identifying tickle with pleasure as to identifying pain with unpleasantness. Tickling may be unpleasant, and many different kinds of pleasure have no reference to tickling. He does not discuss the identification of pleasantness with sexual sensation. Affection is not localized as sensation is. It cannot be increased by attending to it as sensation can. It cannot be recalled in the same fashion. A very unpleasant experience may be recalled with mere amusement. The chief arguments for the view that feeling is an element of consciousness distinct from sensation may be treated under 6 heads, listed in what I regard as the order of their importance, as follows. The first argument is that feelings, unlike sensations, have no special end organs. It seems to me that this is by far the most important of the arguments for the feeling as element view, and the most telling objection to all sensory theories. Even if we identify unpleasantness with pain, we still have a few pleasant experiences to account for. We may squirm out of the dilemma by referring pleasantness to the mere absence of pain, or to tickle, or to sex, or to visceral or kinesthetic sensations, and hazard guesses about the free nerve endings in the periphery. But the fact remains that definite pleasure endings, definite pleasure nerves, and definite cortical areas comparable to those correlated with visual and auditory sensations have not as yet been demonstrated. However, we may point out that the same is true of certain other experiences which even Wundt and his followers recognize as sensational, and we may recall that, less than 50 years ago, the same argument was applicable to warmth, cold, touch, and pain, which are now almost universally admitted as sensations. The second argument is that feelings, unlike sensations, cannot be definitely localized. This argument has, in my judgment, much less force than the preceding one. In the first place, we must remember that many trained introspectionists report that feeling is localized. Wohlgemuth for example, says that feeling elements can often be localized, and adds that he himself became aware of a marked unpleasure localized at the lower part of the thighs, which above the region of the knee joint. H.R. Crossland, if I read him correctly, seemed to locate it in his head. It is not in our feet, it is not in our legs, it is not in our internal organs, it is not in our throat, it is not in our skin. It is not in our eyes, it is not in our ears, it is not in our scalp. And forced to tell where it is, in despair we raise our hands and say somewhere generally up here in our head. Fortunately, however, we are not forced to choose between Crossland's head and Wolgamoth's knee joints. The whole business of localization is relative anyway, and we all know that some sensations are localized more accurately than others, and that this localization varies with the intensity and duration of the stimulus, the part of the body stimulated, the extent of the stimulated area, the nature of the end organs involved, etc. So that this sort of page turning difficulty, sort of evidence certainly fails to separate pleasantness and unpleasantness from sensation. The third argument is that feelings, unlike sensations, lack the attribute of clearness. This is the favorite argument of the Cornell people, and is based upon Titchener's two-level theory of attention, as Crossland puts it. The affections were attended to disappear. The affections, when attended to, disappear, whereas most sensations clear up. We deny absolutely that organic sensations, when attended to, disappear from consciousness. Suppose you get up in the morning somewhat bilious. Can you not, by attending to that experience, finally hunt out the spot from which the trouble seems to emanate, say a point in the alimentary tract, from which these sensations seem to radiate? And while you are doing that, your unpleasantness, for the time being, has disappeared, but your organic sensation has not evacuated by any means. I'm going to take a drink because I'm cottonmouth. Do stomach aches disappear when you attend to them? If so, the doctors may as well shut up shop. Are stomach aches so devoid of clearness that we cannot localize them? Or do we have stomach ache in our feet, or all over our body, or in our head? Or if I sit in your problem and am aware of a jerk, a thump of my internal organs, and then a slow, tensed lowering or settling, are these organic sensations utterly devoid of clearness? Can you ever describe the feelings as minutely and as exactly as you can describe organic reactions, giving the characteristics and fairly definite localizations? Can you ever as definitely localize and describe the feelings as you can sensations of sex, defecation, nausea, or whatnot? However much you may schematize as to the relative clearness values of sensations, and I grant you that organic sensations are the least clear, you cannot establish that they are absolutely lacking in clearness, or that they disappear from consciousness when attended to. Nor can you establish that the lack of clearness of organic sensations equals the lack of clearness of the affections. It is our view that the inability to visually perceive the interior organs, the points of stimulation, and the inability to touch them with our hands and fingers accounts very largely for their lack of extreme clearness and definiteness of localization. Probably surgeons and anatomists experience clearer and more localizable organic sensations than do we who have never studied the internal parts of our body. Personally, all this talk of conscious experience which lacks clearness is quite unintelligible to me. Like Watt, I can no more conceive of a state of consciousness without clearness than of one lacking duration. J.B. Watson expresses his opinion unambiguously enough. I have no sympathy with Titchener's view that these processes are never clear. It is a plain assumption, and a very weak one, arrived at largely in the interest of obtaining a structural differentiation between sensation and affection. At times these processes occur in conjunction with those from the eye and the ear, and since in certain situations the latter have very great stimulating value, the organic feature is extremely hard to observe. Under these conditions they are to some extent obscure, as are all other organic processes, such as breathing, activity of the glands, circulation, etc. It is here, possibly, that Titchener gets his evidence for the view that they cannot be attended to. Everyone admits that some conscious experiences are clearer than others. I have no knowledge of any experiences which have no clearness at all. If Titchener means only that feelings are not focally clear, we may answer that this is true of many organic and muscular sensations. Besides, it is not difficult to find trained introspectionists like Wohlgemuth who declare that under certain conditions the feelings can be brought into the focus of attention. The fourth argument for the non-sensory character of feeling is that feelings are subjective while sensations are objective. As Wundt put it, the view that feelings are a particular species of sensations is unattainable because the two classes of elements are distinguished by the immediate relation of sensations to objects and of feelings to the subject. Crosland presents this argument as follows. By subjective, we mean the combination of three things. 1. The feelings are not bound up with, nor do they temporarily occur at the time of, the greatest clearness of the perceived object or of the sensation experienced. They either precede or lag behind the focal awareness of the object or the sensation, whatever the sensation is. 2. Subjectivity to us means cortical, or to express it negatively, it is not out there. It is not in our feet. It is not in our throat. It is not in our skin. And it is not in our eyes. It is not in our ears. It is not in our scalp. And forced to tell where it is, in despair we raise our hands and say somewhere generally up here in our head. 3. Green exists in the object. Pain exists at the point of stimulation. Organic sensations exist in our internal organs. Auditory sensations ring in our ears, and visual sensations are always objectified. Hence, any point, either out there in space or in our own body, except the interior of our head, is objective. And to state that a given object is pleasant does not by any manner or means refer the pleasantness into the object. We merely mean that the object, as opposed to other objects, usually arouses within us a feeling of pleasantness. Take the color green, for instance. We shall say every time in everyday language, scratch. That green is pleasant. But green to us is in the object, and the pleasantness in us, as we tried to describe above. All this seems to mean that when we are attending to sensations, feelings do not occur, and that feelings are localized somewhere in the head. I cannot find anything here which separates feelings from the sensory processes. The fifth argument is that feelings vary between maximal opposites, while sensations do not. If this argument refers to quality, I can only say that I have not the faintest notion what the introspectionist means. If it means only that pleasantness and unpleasantness do not occur simultaneously, I can only point out that many psychologists, Solly, Ebbinghaus, Lehmann, Setzinger, Nagel, and many others, claim that they do so occur, even if it were granted that pleasantness and unpleasantness do not coexist in time and space. There are many sensations which do not coexist either. The sixth and last argument is that feelings, unlike sensations, cannot be imagined. In regard to this, it is well to recall that some observers, Ribbett, Stumpf, Nagel, and others, report that they do get affective imagery, while it is by no means established that all sensations can be imagined. Titchener himself admits that he cannot imagine pain and is very dubious as regards cold. Fernberger says he has very few, if any, visual images, and Kurt Rosenau doubts whether he has auditory imagery. It must certainly be acknowledged that the no-image argument has failed as a criterion of affection. And I believe that is the end of book. Yep, that's it. That's the end of book number 727, The Psychology of the Affections, written by Vance Randolph. Copyright 1924. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next Little Blue Book.